context of the case. What motivated this case? What do you see as the key issues? And then we'll just open it up for discussion. Go ahead.
Case motivation is kind of interesting. It was an odd situation. It's not the kind of thing that you run into all the time. You go, you work with the client, you engage the client, and it's straightforward. But the nature of the client, in this case, the on-side, created some challenges. First of all, the vectors into it were from traditional research I was doing into some historical events. And those historical events had a number of threads that tied into something I didn't expect to find. And that's this kind of psychic New Age cult sort of thing. And at least at the time, that's what I thought. But as I started looking into it, it wasn't. It wasn't a cult. It was grounded in science, engineering, principles of science, reproducibility, scientific rigor, objectivity, scientific protocols were all enforced in this. And it turned out not to be so much the psychic bits that people kind of tend to associate. So as I got more and more interested, I thought, okay, there was so much history tied into this place. I want to go and experience, or at least investigate, the validity. 30 seconds on my background. Of course, Gill, at the same time I say that, it just goes off.
Yeah.
My background is hard science. My bachelor's degree, I spent 13 years at Texas Instruments doing software development, operations, systems administration, things like that. I have a bachelor's degree from Texas A&M in marine biology. I've co-authored publications and things like the Journal of Science. I've participated in expeditions to Antarctica on behalf of the National Science Foundation. I've co-authored articles in the Journal of Brain Research, where I've actually done stroke research at the University of South Florida. So I'm a hardcore science guy. And so as I started looking at this thing, I started seeing all the rigors of real science. I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. I wonder if it's really like that. The only way to find out, good scientist, go and investigate. Find out, is it real, is it not? So I went, and when I was there, I was looking at the facility, I was looking at what they were doing, and there were a lot of issues that started coming up. They were constrained. They could only run 80 people through. They were getting kind of lost in the backwash of all the real trendy New Age things that were going on that weren't based in scientific rigor. It didn't have that element in it. And so I started looking into things, and one of the individuals who had been preeminent in the historical side in the military was closely associated now with this organization. And he taught a class, a series of things. So I thought, wow, that's a real historical figure. I'd like to go take a course from him. So I went back. And as I did, I started developing relationships with the CEO, with the founder, with the different bits. I learned more about the challenges they were facing. And given my background, I started going, wow, we can kind of bring all this together. We can go and create not just an online course or an e-learning, but we can recreate the experience that these historical people went through. And because of the nature of it, it's highly interactive. Their clientele list included politicians, lots of people you would know, business leaders, people who, if their name got out, that they were involved or linked to something like this. You tell, I'm even hesitant talking about it being up here now, you guys know. And so, privacy really drove what happened. So it was critical. You could shut them down if that credibility ever got out. So what I was going to do was, again, instead of just e-learning, was bring that experience, which was highly interactive. You go, you have a session, you come back, you dialogue with your peers, you go on another session, you come back, dialogue with your peers. And that real-time interaction was critical. In between, you had static, reproduced, traditional content that could get out and be lifted and utilized by the organizations, and now you have it done. Your proprietary edge is gone. So you have to protect your content, you have to protect the privacy of the participants, but you also have a historical site that people come from Japan, from France, from literally all over the world to participate in. So now your audience is constrained by the cost of travel. Say someone's coming from Japan, very expensive. The time it takes to do the travel, spend a full week at the facility, and then return, it all adds up. And so, if you could take that to a broader global audience, give them the same experience, you could easily have a 5-fold increase in the participants of your program. And at $2,000 a person for the week, that's pretty good. You could also substantially drive down your cost, and this is where cloud computing starts to come in, because you could take advantage of the elasticity of it. If you have 15 people in a course, you don't have to pay for the full infrastructure. You spin up the infrastructure needed to support that individual on Friday when they come into the program, and on next Friday when they leave, you spin it down. If you have 30, you spin up the resources for 30. You don't have to spin it for 30 every time. And you could take it larger. Also, the way they do business is they bring in their facilitator from wherever in the world they need to bring that facilitator in. So if you have a facilitator who's from Korea, who's going to be in for a week and then going home or someplace else for a weekend, say you're from Chicago, and you fly in for the weekend, or for the week, do the program, turn around, fly home for the weekend, fly back, that airfare starts to rack up. You start losing money. If you can take this and use this effectively, using cloud technologies, you don't have that overhead. So your overhead and expenses are going down. Also, when you've got them coming into the safety net facility, you're providing room and board for them. You're not providing room and board when you're hosting a remote cloud. So now, you've eliminated the cost of travel, you've eliminated the cost of carrying your facilitating staff around. You can now lower the cost of your course. And when you lower the cost of your course, you start opening it up to a broader audience, and it just keeps moving and moving. And so, that combination is very, very attractive. However, in reproducing the exact experience of being in the facility, what you have to have is real-time or extremely near real-time facilities. And also by the nature of what they're doing, it has to be virtually 100% reliable. Now, cloud, you can do that. You can put in triple redundancies, feeding into a monitoring system, it's fail, it automatically gets spun back up while you've gone to 3 levels of failover. If that 3rd level fails, you go over to one of the cert buses on the other side, cache things to the extent where the links break down. So bottom line is there's a way to make it 99.9. You get past the 5 nines of capability. And if you're only looking for that for the period of the week, when you've got class, you can really beef that up towards virtually 100%. So the reliability issue gets addressed, but in order to manage that latency, as I was saying, you have to pre-position equipment. In order to get that sort of reliability, you have to pre-position content. Their approach for doing that was take a suitcase, fill it up with all sorts of equipment, and wireless routers, and not miles, but several hundred yards of cable, try and get hotel rooms where they were all clustered together, and then send your facilitator overseas to do that. Today, with TSA and everything else, try and take cases full of cabling, network, routers, and everything else through TSA. And content, this was getting to be increasingly problematic. So, again, if they were going to expand, if they were going to grow, if they were going to do anything to move beyond this constrained facility. Oh, and there's one other problem that they faced. The county in which they exist, there is no high-speed internet at all. Analog dial-up is it. 56K rules the day. So again, they had to have a cloud-based solution because there was no way, even within the Gates County, that they could do this. So they were facing a lot of challenges. But meanwhile, you have the secret coming out and a lot of new age things. Guys out there making very millions of dollars for things that aren't really based on much. They make you feel better when it's over, but so now the problem starts to come in. So we talked a little bit about cloud computing, You've got software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. You know, you've used software as a service if you've used Gmail, if you've used Google Docs, if you use Office 365, things like that. Platform as a service, I'm sitting there pounding out code. I don't want to maintain all the servers and everything. I just want to punch a button, publish my software, have it available for you to come and select. So that's platform as a service. Infrastructure as a service is, I'm an IT manager. I've got my racks and racks of servers, they're all virtualized. I want to move them up. And once they're up, I want to utilize them. I want to spin up what I need when I need it, spin it down when I don't. So this project utilized basically that sort of capability. We build an infrastructure per class. We would pre-position the content. And then it would distribute from that pre-position. Essentially, each individual had their own trio of baby servers. So if one of them went down, it went to the next server. It would straight down to their mobile device, and they would be good to go. So now, we start to get into the dilemma of the case. When we take that data, or that content, and we put it on the server, say this week the group that is in Japan, let's back up one more step. Talk about data for just a minute. With this content. Culture drives things. Privacy is implemented through security. Culture drives laws, values, norms, the ability to enforce those laws and those norms. So, in France, a long time we've been struggling with the right to be forgotten. In Canada, if you put data on servers in the United States, the responsibility is with the Canadian company. In the EU, it's with the American company. That American company is required to have an office in Europe, and so you start getting this convoluted chain and things start getting confused real fast. Then if you go to China, it doesn't matter who owns it. It's put on general server. It's readily available to the Chinese government, and off it goes. So how that data gets utilized, how it gets stored, varies from region to region to region and country to country to country. So cloud computing provides a homogeneous technical infrastructure that really knocks down all the barriers to global computing. You've got latency issues, you've got too technical. I'm not saying that it's the utopia of everything. But what it is a standard protocol, standard procedures that let you execute a global infrastructure based on varying technologies. So we now have this content, and we're hosting, say, in order to manage latency, we want to spin up our servers in Asia Pac, because that's where the majority of the participants are for that class. Or in Europe, we're going to spin one up in Ireland to support Europe and manage the latency that way. Who owns the data? What happens to our content? So you start going, oh, well, it's covered. I like to pick on South Korea because my kids spent 3 years there teaching English, and I've got a lot more fun experience doing in South Korea and first-hand story. So you go to Korea, and Korea wants to be an emerging nation. They want to be seen as a global peer. So they adopt all the international laws. They say they're going to enforce all the international laws on intellectual property, copyright, everything. So they're going to, so you say, we're covered, the laws are there, if anything happens, we're good, we'll take them to court, we're done. So you put that information on there. There's an organization, talked about in the case of it, called IMCIC. IMCIC is wildly successful, and they're kind of, I like the term I came across recently, they're situationally famous. If you're in that cluster, if you're American studying Korean culture, if you're looking at these things, if you want to go teach English as a second language, Simon Martin and YK are very famous. They've got over 650,000 followers on YouTube. That's substantial. They post a video, literally in 24 hours, they have 145,000 hits. So they got approached by a Korean broadcaster that said, hey, We would like to do a food section on our TV show of how Americans and foreigners look at our food. And they said, we're not really interested in that. Thank you very much. We're kind of flattered. But next week, they went, turned on the TV, and there's their online video segment from YouTube downloaded, broadcast as the food section for that same network. Their recourse to go and address that, zero. Why? It's international protection, right? Well, what's your ability to actually get it enforced? Because it has to go in front of the Korean judges, but also the Korean people are going to consume it because it's their culture. It's okay. It's where they come from. It's how they brought up. It's not a bad thing. It's not unethical. It's not immoral. It is the way they live, the way they do things. So you can have this barrier between what is legal and what is enforceable, and that's where the culture and understanding the culture and how quickly that culture is going to move into the other, how laws that bridge those gaps evolve, all come down to understanding culture. So culture is incredibly important. So we got cloud computing, we got culture, and we have concerns over privacy. So now that data is there, what if the name of a senator or a congressman or someone in a position of power, someone makes leaks through that system, through those fours of those servers for some reason, some way, someone sniffs it, whatever. Beyond the size of the board, their reputation, their credibility, built over 30 years is just gone. They're out of business. Me, I've got a liability. Well, gee, when you look at the numbers, I had a pretty good deal negotiated. We would go in, build this for them, and we would take 10% of the gross. And we're looking at the end of the first 24 months, my little business would have been making $4.6 million. Not bad for 6 people. Take and divide that 6 ways. It's a very good living. Not worth the liability or the risk. Where is it? Can we manage that risk? Can we address it? So at the end of the day, my little business, and by the way, I originally, part of the transition of writing the case is when I started this, my business was called Cause Without Borders, and I was focusing on the impact of culture on the adoption and implementation of cloud computing. At the same time, I was spinning up a wildlife and cloud in order to support the wildlife research community, which of course is where half my background and my career lies. So I could disengage from building that community cloud. Recently had the good fortune to sell the trademark, so that's why I'm moving away from Cause Without Borders and I'm moving to Consolidated. So I could stop that venture, which had no promise. It was built around federal grants. Federal grants are now requiring that you have 20% of the grant going to data management. A lot of small and mid-sized labs cannot afford that. They don't have the skills, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the knowledge. And I was going in that community cloud to help bridge that gap and integrate that information. Again, consolidated reality. Many different cultures, many different avenues you create one reality. So I would have to take that team, a couple of developers, creative, designer, and say, we're going to put this on hold for now. We're going to move over here. We're going to build this virtual reality-based system that allows participants minimal latency, maximum uptime, experience going through this historical program. I'm gambling that this is going to work, that we're going to pull this off, because I have now taken all of my eggs, all of my resources, and I put them in a single basket. Or I can say, this is too big for us. Find a larger organization, and we'll software architect it, we'll monitor it, we'll ensure it gets built, we'll follow it through, and we'll charge you 5% of the gross instead of 10 because you're going to build that development. The other option is go in purely as a consultant, help them select that vendor, and then I back away. Fourth option is I say, you know, it's been a really good idea, but I can't guarantee that level of privacy and security that you need. If you think that it's worth it, good luck to you. No charge, no harm, no foul. Okay. So those are my four options. If I did one option in 24 months, I'm a nice, comfy guy making $2 million a year myself, and I'm very handsome, comfortable living for my staff, and we're growing, and we're self-funded growth. We can fund our community cloud, we can move in whatever direction we want to. Where we're going with IT and culture is a new paradigm that takes a lot of education and training and upfront effort to raise awareness on. We could do all of that. But the risk is high. Risk is high. And we had to make that decision. What do we do? And that's what the case is about.
So, a couple of things that I think that you should think about. First off, what you've heard now is a more articulate version of what you typically get during a first case interview. It's easier in this sense because virtually everything he talked about is actually included in the case. When you actually read the case, all of these, the Korean example and so forth, are all included in it. But when you are a case writer going out to do that first interview, it is truly like drinking from a fire hose because you don't have any context. I suspect there were probably a few places along the way where he kind of lost you. That will always happen during the interview. You're constantly getting lost. So I think maybe as a sort of a simulation, now would be a good time to have you ask some questions of Shane as if you were going to be writing this case, now that you have a sort of a general idea. And also, maybe we can get some feedback from those folks of you who are engaged in cybersecurity. Do you see things like privacy, culture, intellectual property as being important elements that people should understand if they're going to be working in cybersecurity or if they want to at least become fluent in it? So maybe we can open it up for questions now. By the way, the dazed look on your faces is exactly the look that I have when I first go in and interview someone. Well, from the cybersecurity group then, I'll ask a question. I mean, how important do you see the issues of privacy, culture, intellectual property being within the cybersecurity field? You know, in the movies, we're mainly looking at things like, people are taking down power plants, destroying the country, all these types of things. But are these issues that he's talking about real issues?
Have you thought about culture as a factor?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, your example about China. China is a very different culture when it comes to privacy. They don't have the regulatory structure, and they don't have even some of they have more cultural biases against privacy in some cases than other countries. Certainly less so than Europe, which has very stringent privacy and security laws. Almost each country there has their own security law, kind of under the umbrella of the European privacy laws.
See, and China's not by nature likely to ever really go there because their base culture, how they've evolved as a civilization, is a community, a collective society. And so their ability to really comprehend that value and why that individual piece of ownership is yours is something that they have a very difficult time grasping. And so that drives that wedge even deeper.
Well, its proximity to Korea as well makes it problematic because there's certainly an uneasy relationship between South Korea and China at this point, especially from a technology standpoint and an information security perspective. The number of attacks and the South Korean government has been under attack from China for years from that perspective.
What type of information do you think that you would need to provide in a case if you're going to capture the richness of this particular decision? What are some of the sections that you'd want to have?
I have another question in the sense when you said the word gambling, I told him that's the word, gambling, you are gambling. And your risk is high. Didn't you think about the possibility of lowering this rate, partnering with some university? I'm talking here about not national cultures, but our academic and corporative culture.
No, hadn't really thought about that. Have thought about ways to manage the risk. I think that there's not a lot of universities that would want to go partner with a quote-unquote psychic research New Age group.
I knew that.
And
In Austria, they are working in order to provide, a space for cybersecurity in academy. And they have talked tomorrow in the afternoon, the people from Austria. So I think that the university and the state should be doing something similar, partnering with the industry in cybersecurity.
there was an approach that we were looking at to manage that risk. Do you want me to leave that out on the table for now, or do you want to go ahead and say?
No, you can talk a little bit about it, sure.
Okay. What it was going and looking at the cultures that were more in sync with ours and shared a more common mindset towards intellectual property and ownership, and then working predominantly in those countries or those regions where we felt safer, even though they weren't necessarily the largest audience or this sort of, but as a way to kind of stick that little toe in the boiling hot water and see if that would got or not.
And I think that's one of the challenges of working with universities as well. Universities for many years have been very much open access and very sharing of information. So it's almost against the way that a lot of them have operated over the years to then try to be much more restricted in who gets access to proprietary information, especially if it's meant to be disseminated to a very small audience.
What's another problem of working with universities when you're talking about basically an ongoing business, which is what he's talking about? Because it's not like it's not like it is options. They're going to give the business he's going to get the business and then walk away. What's the problem with working with universities for ongoing businesses? Go ahead.
Well, coming back to universities,
Yeah.
These are governmental organizations with really strict regulations and strict procedures, so they're very slow and hard to accommodate. Well, maybe that's the general consideration.
Absolutely.
Regarding all
Okay. So
universities, maybe there are some universities which are special.
if you want to slow down the decision-making process, involve a university. Okay. So that's one thing.
Well, could I go a little further?
Sure.
Well, first of all, what about option 3? I guess it's private consulting. What are the risks behind that? Did you go deeper in that?
Liability. If the information got leaked, first thing they'd be doing is going, why didn't you provide enough security here? And just like Grandon, in the issue of fair disclosure, I'm not first and foremost a security guy. I'm a general computing guy, software development, operations, cloud computing, and culture guy. And so, for me, like dealing with lawyers, the security issues, the spots around here, which also was relevant to the case, in that was also my biggest area of personal doubt and insecurity. If I can say one more thing about university.
Yep.
Universities, we have two things. We have our illusions and they have their dignity. We have illusions of universities as altruistic bastions of learning, knowledge, and academia. Universities today are not that. They have that as a characteristic, but they are businesses, and they patent and copyright and lock in and use them to generate funds. They are a competing business entity. And so if you go with a university, you are establishing a partnership, you're going to be signing credentials, you're likely to be sharing patent and ownership rights with them. And what was yours that you created, you thought of, on that could be your basis, is no longer yours. And what was your original idea, maybe taken by a professor or PhD, that and taken by them, published and ran off, and they get the accolades because they have the credentials in the background when it was your idea. And so then your ability to run with it becomes tarnished and restricted. So there's reasons from my standpoint as a small businessman to not partner anymore with the university than might be absolutely necessary. So it seemed to me the best way to, if we were going to mitigate risk, would be very selective.
How about partnering a good lawyer? Getting
That's the double
a
slowdown.
number of papers. I know a Russian professor who owns around 150 US patents, and he's apparently a top officer at a cloud company, which is world recognized. So maybe that's the way, building your own IP security management.
The gentleman here did it with a double whammy. It's not just the way to slow everything down, it's a way to drastically increase your expenses. And they would build your empire around the existing legal infrastructure. But again, depending where you go, your ability to enforce that, they would build it around the laws, but your ability to get that law enforced may not exist.
Yeah, because that's part of the culture issue as well.
It is.
It's a legal process inside the country.
And that's why when you move forward, you can put together the best technological security system that you can imagine. But unless you take that culture factor that drives those laws, the enforceability of those laws, the rate at which those laws are going to change, the rate at which the populace is going to move and evolve as they all shift at different rates in order to come online. Because then you're starting to bring on the safe ones, bring on the next one, bring on the next one, and start trying to build this house. And you want to have as large an organization.
Is data the totality of the data, or is it segregatable in terms of the degrees of protection that you have to actually?
There's a couple of things. For instance, very good question. You can take, for instance, the privacy of the participant. You know, you can do like what happens when an accounting organization offloads your taxes to a group in India. Here in the States, they have the record that matches your secret invisible code up with your name and social security number. So they send the block of data off as a black box, they get the taxes run, and then they re-merge that data. So you could work a scheme like that in order to try and help mask the individual. But you also have the counter of some of the, it's not really hypnotic, but we'll call it hypnotic for the sake of this. Hypnotic learning materials. That doesn't change. That is highly proprietary. It's been evolved because it has been essentially an industrial process with scientific rigor, testing, engineers, broadcast engineers, scientists from major universities. It's another thing. A lot of scientists that are psychologists and engineers from major universities don't really want to know that they participated in this, in developing this. That material, once out, is out. And that can't be
Re-end.
Yeah. I think about the military, because I work for the military. The way you classify information on a need-to-know basis, and you almost bid, and the levels of protection that you would have to invest in for the very most sensitive programs is only a very small finite versus we have a whole bunch of government information that doesn't really need to be classified. Everything that Hillary Clinton has doesn't have to be classified.
By the way, just so you know, 13 years at TI was doing DoD work, so I've had high-level clearances and compartmentalization and clearance and the need-to-know combination. And I had that sort of model in mind as I was trying to approach the security on this. But no, if it flies, swims, crawls, at one point I probably attached it. F-15s, F-16s, toes, chaperones, all sorts of when I was working for marine mammals, I even worked on one system that would go on the back of marine mammals and track their movements in 3D space recreated in virtual reality. So different things can happen. So I've had, I say, a very eclectic career.
Now, one of the comments that I would make right now is what you're doing right now is exactly what we would be doing in the interview process to develop the case. So basically, as a case writer, you're hearing things from the participants, and a lot of times they don't make sense, or you're trying to frame them in terms that can make sense. Because ultimately, when it's written in the case, the reader has to be able to make sense of it. And so basically you ask questions like this. Okay, what types of alternatives have you considered? Why have you rejected some alternatives? How did you come up with the alternatives you have? This is the kind of background that is part of this. And this is one of the reasons why I consider this whole case writing process really a true form of research, because you're actually trying to pull information, synthesize it, and make sense of it. Returning to the question of, what types of things that we need to have in a case like this, what are some of the key highlights of the things that he's talked about? What are some of the issues that seem most important to him? Culture. So we actually need a section in the case to explain culture, and there are various models of culture. In fact, Shane's quite knowledgeable on these models, so he put together, I think it's like 2 or 3 pages, specifically dealing with cultural issues. Now, what else do we need to know? What else are we going to need to have in the case in terms of general background? The cloud, right. Basically, you cannot assume that your students are necessarily going to understand the cloud. If you're dealing only with a narrow group of information technology students, you will find that, maybe you don't have to give as much. But if you want this for a general audience, are the issues in this case fairly general? Well, I would argue that privacy, protection of intellectual property, where to computer remain issues that are relevant to most businesses. So if you want to make this case relevant to most businesses, you really need to include that background. One of the things I will also tell you is even in our master's program in MIS, which has been a very successful program, I am often surprised at how little our students know about a specific topic, which I would assume that they would be completely knowledgeable about, like information architectures and stuff like that. They're used to solving specific problems, but not necessarily zeroing in a big way. Now, what's another thing that you need to understand in order to understand this case?
Jurisdiction, of course.
Jurisdiction, right. Now we're talking about laws, because it's not just the culture, it's the way the culture drives the laws and what happens when you move across borders. Also, if the case is going to make sense, you have to understand a little bit about this organization beyond the sign, which is a disguise name. And you can talk a little bit about the process of disguising without revealing anything. But, because of the sensitive nature of the case, the only way really to get a case like this approved is to disguise everything. So you can talk about some of the things that you did. Oh, yeah.
Could I ask some? Well, the first map that I am building here, I have precisely cloud infrastructure,
Yeah.
culture, content, IP, and now jurisdiction into map. Now I have in the next phase privacy and security. It is all this has to be funneled down or connected to privacy and security. And from there, how do you go to the 10%, 5%, this high risk third option, and the 2 million per year? I am trying to figure out how do I go from all of this technology, culture, content, etc., privacy, security, and then to the 4 options that you have. I still have.
Well, that's because there's a whole section missing, and this is the section where he actually describes where the numbers come from, and that is basically dealing with the businesses. So he deals with specifically the throughput of the beyond the side, what their limitations are, and then goes on to identify the source of his estimates. And of course, there's another issue here because the decision is not his alone. He can decide what to propose, but what's the other end of the decision?
Somebody has to accept it.
Will they accept it? And this is a very small organization, and large organizations, do they typically want to pay $2 million a year to a small organization? So now it's not just a matter of what he proposes, but it's also if he decides to go ahead, how is it going to be proposed in such a way that it will seem acceptable to the organization? Here, you can.
Oh, I just have a question about the principles of writing a piece. So, is it a good idea or a bad idea to give the reader 4 specific options, or do we normally not give options and let them just figure out what those options would be? Does that make sense?
Yes, no, that's a very good case, a very good question, and my feeling is if he's got options that he's considering, then it makes sense to give them because it makes it easier to formulate the discussion. Now, where you don't have options, and by the way, that will be the case with Leonid's case, because I haven't exactly figured out what his options are, then it becomes, so I've got 6 pages or 7 pages of that case written, but I'm not sure how to end it. So that's one of the reasons why we're bringing this one here. So that is the answer is you try to be as authentic as possible with the case writer. Now, in Shane's case, because he was the protagonist as well as the case writer, it's a selfie case. One of the things that happens in the process of writing a case about your own organization is you tend to start coming up with specific options because you need them for the case. And that actually can help you frame your thought. But that's also something that happens when you write a case about another organization because you keep pressing them, just as is happening there, pressing them for details and options. Well, why aren't you considering this? Why aren't you considering that? And that actually helps the organization, especially a small business, better think about the actual decision that they need to make.
Now, for example, he may not be able to go to partners because of the sensitivity of the information, the fact that the BT side doesn't want to share it with anybody else but you.
I'm going to inject here because before I forget, but it's directly with what you're saying. Why that level of trust? This is something we talk about. Why that level of trust between Beyond the Side and my company and myself? Because we are talking about huge numbers. What in the end could be $1 billion a year for them, where they're a $256 million company now. That's phenomenal growth in 24 months.
4 times
In 24 months. And that's a conservative figure. And so why should they trust me? 1, I had the idea. 2, I went to that first seminar session. The person I went to for the second one, who was actually a participant in those historical meetings. So the first one was kind of like what happened historically. The second one was with one of those people. And they're getting old, they're dying off. It was a rare opportunity. Turns out his wife is the daughter of the founder of the organization. And the person who was co-facilitating that session was the wife of their director of technology. So at that point, we're starting with this trust relationship and having dinner with those people. So I go back, I come up with my plan. That's the easiest way to do it. I'll take a 3rd course. So I went, took a 3rd course, had my plan, scheduled, talked to some of the other participants, got some momentum built, and I got the other participants going to the person teaching the 3rd course, who happened to be, this is where doing your homework always comes in handy, right? Turns out to be the director of technology. And so they were going, you need to talk to Shane. Got to talk to Shane. And so we scheduled a 3-hour meeting. We sat down and put the architecture in front of them, and put the numbers in front of them. They knew me from having gone through multiple courses with them, a week course. They knew I understood them. I understood what drove them, what their pressures were, what it was I was saying I could recreate. And as we moved through that process, we developed a very good close working relationship.
So what we're seeing now is basically the type of things that would go on during the actual discussion of the case. What I'm going to do is, since we've got 3 of these today, I'm going to close this discussion off. We'll take a 5-minute break. But I want you to understand that this is, what we're describing is very much part of the process. And actually, when I read Shane's first draft, one of my questions was, well, I can't, based on this draft, I cannot understand why they're offering you this business, or why they're even considering you because of the size of the deal. And so Shane actually went in and fleshed that out, because as a case writer, you have to create something that makes sense to the reader. If it doesn't make sense to the reader, then you won't have a good discussion. So I want to thank Shane, and we'll take a 5-minute break.